So I'd like to take a look at this very famous essay, or this is a section of a longer work called Anthropology and the Abnormal by Ruth Benedict, who was not a philosopher, she was an anthropologist. Very, very influential, though, early 20th century American anthropologist. Um, this essay is a real classic, and although it may not be official sort of academic moral philosophy, it's very provocative and memorable. And she lays out a position which is very challenging. She doesn't try to defend it through argument. She just kind of lays it out there, and it's for us to sort of decide whether or not we think it's a valid commentary on what morality is. One of the first things that she says is quite striking, or that's quite striking, in the first paragraph, is that we sort of Westerners, modern Westerners, we have a particular culture, which you would call maybe the higher culture. And really, by calling it a higher culture, it's certainly not meaning it's a better culture than the more simple cultures that she talks about. Let's say the culture of the Kwakiutl tribes of the late 19th century. But modern Western technological, rationalistic, literary civilization, that we take it for granted that our mores, our customs, our way of doing things is simply the right way. And the point she makes is it's been a very successful way, but that doesn't mean that our values somehow have universal validity. She says here, in the higher cultures, the standardization of custom and belief over a couple of continents, and she means North America and Europe, has given a false sense of the inevitability of the particular forms that have gained currency, and we need to turn to a wider survey in order to check the conclusions we hastily based upon this near universality of familiar customs. Most of the simpler cultures, and simpler cultures are just sort of hunter-gatherer cultures, small agricultural peoples like the Kwakiutl. Most of the simpler cultures did not gain the wide currency of the one which, out of our experience, we identify with human nature, or just human nature per se. But this was for various historical reasons, and certainly not for any that gives us, as its carriers, a monopoly of social good or social sanity. Modern civilization, from this point of view, becomes not a necessary pinnacle of human achievement, but one entry in a long series of possible adjustments. I think that's a pretty, whatever you think of cultural relativism, that's a pretty good statement of it right there. That is, if we think about what we're doing this week reading Ruth Benedict, we're not doing normative ethics. It's not like Kant or utilitarianism, where a normative principle is being laid down about what defines the good and what we should do. This is a different sort of thing. This is a commentary on ethics itself, what might be called meta-ethics. So it's not normative ethics. She's not a moral philosopher telling you what the good is. She's, let's say, an anthropologist and a philosopher who is telling you what ethics is or what morality is. And what is she telling you it is? It's custom. It's the mores of a particular people at a particular time. This is after her examples in the middle of this essay. She sort of gives a more theoretical commentary on it here on page 4. She says here at the top, normality, what is normal, in short, within a very wide range, is culturally defined. And that may be obvious, that what is normal is simply what is customarily done. And that changes from place to place and from time to time, so it's culturally defined. It is primarily a term for the socially elaborated segment of human nature in any culture. That is what, from all the possible variations of behaviors and tastes and values, it's what got elaborated at one particular time as opposed to another place and another time. And she has that great line, the very eyes with which we see the problem are conditioned by the long traditional habits of our own society. It's very difficult to see the particularities and partialities of our own customs, because we see them we see them as inevitable. But what her point is that they're not. That her whole point with these examples from different places, different times, different attitudes towards what's normal and what's acceptable behavior is that there's all sorts of variation that's possible, and that actually has happened. Um, and it's quite challenging. So, maybe to say that normality is culturally defined is not all that shocking, but if you see what she goes on to say about morality, it's more challenging, I think. She says it is a point that has been made more often, right here, get it, in relation to ethics than in relation to psychiatry. We do not any longer make the mistake of deriving the morality of our own locality and decade directly from the inevitable constitution of human nature. We do not elevate it to the dignity of a first principle. Tell that to Thomas Aquinas, right? This is a good contrast to Thomas Aquinas. We recognize that morality differs in every society and is a convenient term for socially approved habits. That's where it gets much more challenging, I think. First of all, the claim that morality does differ in every society. I'm not quite sure that that's true, but it's certainly a plausible idea. And moreover, saying that morality is a convenient term for socially approved habits is to just take a certain view of morality. That's all morality is. Morality is not about what's good, it's about what is socially approved. So that given the variety of what can be socially approved, what's good in one society is not good in another, and what's evil in one society is not evil in another. That's the position of cultural relativism. And I think that's where you go back to her examples, and the most challenging of which is the example of the people who lost members of their group who apparently died. And their response to that was to go out and sort of find random people and kill them. That's shocking and challenging. But what she's saying is that that's the way that they view justice or the appropriate response to losing valued members of your group. You have to put things back in balance, I guess. And we would find all sorts of problems with that, most of us, Westerners. But the challenge that she's offering to any sort of objective morality is that by the lights of those people, that behavior, those actions are not bad. And our customs might, our moral customs might seem just as strange to them as they seem to us. Now, whether or not that's true, I mean, whether or not it's true that the morality of one culture can't be called superior to another, I'm not sure. But it certainly is a very great challenge, and the general thesis of cultural relativism, that is that it's called moral cultural relativism, that all morality is relative to culture, is laid out here, I think, in one of the best ways, the best way that I've ever read it, and certainly a thesis that's worth thinking about.